Sarah Martinez had always been drawn to helping others. As a volunteer paramedic in the small coastal town of Ocean View, she spent her days responding to emergency calls alongside the local fire department. At 28 years old, she had seen her share of accidents, but nothing could have prepared her for what would happen on that foggy Tuesday morning in March. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. A military transport truck had skidded off the winding coastal highway during the early morning fog, rolling down a steep embankment before coming to rest against a cluster of pine trees. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio with urgency. There was a soldier trapped inside, and the vehicle was leaking fuel. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and rushed to the ambulance with her partner, Mike Rodriguez. They had worked together for 3 years, and Mike knew that when Sarah got that determined look in her eyes, nothing would stop her from helping someone in need. As they raced toward the accident site, the fog was so thick they could barely see 20 feet ahead of their vehicle. When they arrived at the scene, Sarah could see the overturned military truck wedged between 2 large pine trees, about 50 feet down the embankment. The local fire chief, Tom Bradley, was already there with his crew. But they were having trouble accessing the vehicle due to the steep slope and unstable ground. "We've got 1 soldier still trapped inside," Chief Bradley called out as Sarah and Mike approached. "The driver made it out with minor injuries, but his passenger is unconscious and pinned by the dashboard. The truck is sitting on loose soil, and we're worried about it sliding further down the hill." Sarah looked down at the precariously positioned vehicle. Smoke was beginning to rise from the engine compartment, and she could smell gasoline in the air. The fire crew was setting up their equipment, but she could see they were being cautious about the unstable ground conditions. "How long until you can get the jaws of life down there?" Sarah asked Chief Bradley. "At least 15 minutes to get everything in position safely," he replied. "Maybe longer with this terrain." Sarah studied the trapped soldier through the cracked windshield. Even from her position at the top of the embankment, she could see that he was young, probably not much older than 21. His military uniform indicated he was a Marine, and she could see blood on his forehead where he had struck the dashboard during the crash. "We don't have 15 minutes," Sarah said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. She had treated enough head injuries to know that time was critical, especially if there was internal bleeding or swelling. Mike put his hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, I know what you're thinking, but the fire department has the right equipment for this. We should wait." But Sarah was already strapping on her medical kit and checking her radio. She had made up her mind. The young Marine needed immediate medical attention, and she wasn't going to stand by and watch while his condition potentially worsened. "I'm going down there," she announced to Chief Bradley. "I can stabilize him until your crew can extract him." Chief Bradley shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. That ground is too unstable, and the vehicle could shift at any moment. We can't risk losing a paramedic too." Sarah understood his concerns, but she also knew that every minute they waited increased the risk to the trapped Marine. She had been rock climbing since she was a teenager, and she felt confident she could navigate the slope safely. More importantly, she couldn't shake the image of the young soldier's pale face through the windshield. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Just long enough to assess his condition and start an IV if needed. I'll be attached to a safety line the whole time." Chief Bradley looked uncertain, but Sarah could see in his eyes that he understood the urgency of the situation. After a moment of consideration, he nodded, reluctantly. "2 firefighters go with you," he said. "And if that truck moves even an inch, you come back up immediately." Sarah agreed to the conditions and quickly began preparing for the descent. She strapped on a climbing harness while 2 of the firefighters, Jake Morrison and Lisa Chen, prepared safety ropes. The fog was beginning to lift slightly, which would make the descent easier but also revealed just how precarious the truck's position really was. As Sarah started down the embankment, she could hear the metal of the truck creaking softly in the morning breeze. The sound sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to focus on the task ahead. The young Marine was depending on her. The descent took nearly 10 minutes, with Sarah carefully testing each step to avoid triggering a landslide. When she finally reached the overturned truck, she could see the trapped soldier more clearly. He was definitely unconscious, and there was more blood than she had initially observed. The dashboard had pinned his left leg, and his breathing appeared shallow. "Can you hear me?" Sarah called out as she positioned herself near the driver's side door, which was now facing upward due to the truck being on its side. There was no response. Sarah carefully opened the door and assessed the situation. The Marine's name tag read, Williams, and she could see that he was indeed very young, probably fresh out of basic training. His pulse was weak but steady, and she immediately began checking for signs of serious head trauma. "Williams, my name is Sarah, and I'm here to help you," she said in a calm, reassuring voice, even though he couldn't hear her. She had learned early in her career that talking to unconscious patients was important, both for their potential awareness and for her own focus. As Sarah worked to stabilize William's neck and start an IV, she became completely absorbed in the medical procedures. She was vaguely aware of the firefighters above calling down updates, but her entire world had narrowed to the injured Marine in front of her. It was while she was adjusting William's position to improve his breathing that she felt the truck begin to shift. The movement was subtle at first, just a slight settling that could have been caused by her weight distribution, but then she heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against rock and the soft rumble of soil beginning to slide. "Sarah, get out of there now!" Chief Bradley's voice boomed from above. But Sarah realized with growing alarm that Williams was in a more critical condition than she had initially assessed. His breathing was becoming more labored, and she suspected internal injuries that would require immediate surgery. The truck shifted again, more dramatically this time, and Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized they were both in serious danger. She had managed to stabilize William's condition somewhat, but moving him now without proper spinal protection could cause paralysis or worse. In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Instead of climbing out of the truck to safety, she positioned herself to shield Williams from any debris if the truck continued to slide. She grabbed her radio and called up to Chief Bradley. "I'm staying with him," she said simply. "He's not stable enough to move, and if this truck goes down further, someone needs to be here to keep him alive." The response from above was immediate and loud. Multiple voices were shouting for her to abandon the vehicle and climb to safety, but Sarah had already made her choice. She wedged herself securely in the truck and focused on keeping William's airway clear while monitoring his vital signs. What happened next would be talked about in Ocean View for years to come. The truck suddenly lurched forward with a grinding crash of metal and stone, sliding another 20 feet down the embankment before coming to rest against a massive boulder. The impact threw Sarah hard against the roof of the truck, and the last thing she remembered was seeing William's eyes flutter open briefly before everything went black. When the rescue crews finally reached both of them 45 minutes later, they found Sarah unconscious but still positioned protectively over Williams, her body having absorbed most of the impact from loose debris that had fallen into the truck during the slide. Williams, thanks to Sarah's quick medical intervention and protection during the fall, was conscious and asking about the woman who had saved his life. The story of Sarah's courage spread quickly through the small town and beyond, but Sarah herself would not learn about the impact of her actions until she woke up 3 days later in the county hospital to find her world completely transformed by a simple act of selfless bravery. The awakening. The first thing Sarah noticed when she opened her eyes was the steady beeping of medical equipment. The sound was familiar and comforting, reminding her of countless hours spent in ambulances and emergency rooms. But as her vision cleared and she tried to sit up, a sharp pain in her ribs reminded her that this time she was the patient. "Easy there, hero," came a gentle voice from beside her bed. Sarah turned to see Dr. Patricia Wells, the chief of emergency medicine at Ocean View County Hospital, sitting in a chair with a warm smile. Dr. Wells had been Sarah's mentor when she first started as a paramedic, and seeing her familiar face brought a sense of relief. "How long have I been out?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse and dry. 3 days, Dr. Wells replied, reaching for a water cup with a straw. "You have a concussion, 3 bruised ribs, and some impressive bruises, but you're going to be just fine. Much better than we initially feared when they brought you in." As Sarah sipped the water, memories of the accident began flooding back. The overturned truck, the young Marine named Williams. The decision to stay with him as the vehicle slid down the embankment. "Williams," she said suddenly, trying to sit up despite the pain. "The Marine I was with. Is he okay?" Dr. Wells smiled and gently pressed Sarah back down onto the pillows. "Private First Class Danny Williams is alive and recovering, thanks to you. He's actually been asking about you every day since the accident. He has a broken leg and some internal bruising, but he's expected to make a full recovery. The doctors said that without your immediate medical intervention at the scene, he probably wouldn't have survived the additional fall when the truck slid." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but Dr. Wells wasn't finished. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," she continued. "What you did down there has gotten a lot of attention. The story has been picked up by news outlets across the country. You're being called a hero." Before Sarah could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. "Doctor." Wells looked toward the entrance and smiled. "Actually, there are some people who have been waiting very patiently to see you." Sarah nodded, curious about who might be waiting to see her. She expected maybe Mike, her paramedic partner, or Chief Bradley from the fire department. What she didn't expect was the tall, distinguished man in a marine dress blue uniform who entered her room. "Miss Martinez," the man said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of military leadership. "I'm Colonel James Harrison from Camp Pendleton. I've traveled here specifically to meet you." Sarah felt overwhelmed and slightly embarrassed. "I was just doing my job, sir. Any paramedic would have done the same thing." Colonel Harrison shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, with respect, what you did goes far beyond the call of duty. You risked your own life to save one of my Marines, and then you stayed with him when you could have climbed to safety. That's not just professional dedication. That's heroism." "Reedy." The colonel pulled up a chair beside her bed. "Private First Class Williams has told us everything about what happened down there, how you kept him calm, how you positioned yourself to protect him during the fall, how you never left his side even when you knew you were in danger. He credits you with saving his life." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, partly from emotion and partly from the lingering effects of her concussion. "I'm just glad he's okay. Is he here? Can I see him?" "He's actually right outside," Colonel Harrison said. "But first, I need to tell you about something that's been happening while you've been recovering. The story of your rescue has reached a lot of people, including some very important ones in the military community." Dr. Wells moved closer to the bed. "Sarah, there's something else you should know. There are reporters outside who want to interview you, and apparently the mayor wants to give you a commendation. But more than that, the Marine Corps has been in contact with the hospital." Colonel Harrison nodded. "Miss Martinez, it's not often that a civilian puts their life on the line for one of our Marines the way you did. The Commandant of the Marine Corps himself has heard about your actions, and there's going to be a ceremony to honor your courage." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention. She had always been a private person, someone who preferred to help others quietly without recognition. The idea of ceremonies and media attention made her uncomfortable. "I don't need any ceremonies," she said quietly. "I'm just grateful that Williams is okay." At that moment, another knock came at the door. This time, it was a young man on crutches, wearing a hospital gown but standing tall despite his injuries. Sarah recognized him immediately as Private First Class Danny Williams, though he looked much healthier than when she had last seen him trapped in the overturned truck. "Ma'am," Williams said, his voice thick with emotion, "I had to come thank you personally." Williams made his way slowly to her bedside, and Sarah could see that he was fighting back tears. He was indeed very young, probably 19 or 20, with short-cropped brown hair and earnest blue eyes. "You saved my life," he continued. "The doctors told me that if you hadn't started that IV and kept my airway clear, I wouldn't have made it. And then when the truck fell again, you covered me with your own body. I don't know how to thank someone for something like that. Sarah reached out and took his hand. You don't need to thank me, Danny. I'm just doing what I hope someone would do for my own family. If they were in trouble. William squeezed her hand gently. My mom and dad want to meet you when you're feeling better. They're driving out from Ohio. They said they want to thank the angel who saved their son. The conversation was interrupted by another knock. This one, from Mike Rodriguez, Sarah's paramedic partner. He entered the room carrying a large bouquet of flowers and wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Well, look who's finally awake, Mike said, setting the flowers on the nightstand. You know, partner, when I said we should try to get more recognition for EMS workers, I didn't mean you should nearly get yourself killed to do it. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. Mike always knew how to lighten the mood. Even in serious situations. The whole department has been worried sick about you, Mike continued. Chief Bradley has been here every day, and the entire fire crew sends their regards. They're all calling you the bravest person they've ever worked with. Colonel Harrison stood up from his chair. Miss Martinez, I'm going to let you rest and recover, but I want you to know that what you did will not be forgotten. The ceremony I mentioned will be held once you're fully recovered, and it will be something special. You've earned the respect and gratitude of every Marine who serves. As the colonel prepared to leave, he paused at the door. There's one more thing you should know. The story of your rescue has inspired a lot of people. We've been getting calls from all over the country from people who want to help or show their appreciation. Your actions have reminded people what true courage looks like. After the visitors left, Sarah was alone with Dr. Wells, who helped her get more comfortable in the bed. How are you feeling about all this attention? Dr. Wells asked gently. Sarah considered the question carefully. Honestly, it's overwhelming. I never expected anything like this. I was just trying to help someone who needed it. Dr. Wells nodded understandingly. That's exactly what makes you special, Sarah. You don't see yourself as a hero, but everyone else does. Sometimes the most heroic people are the ones who don't think of themselves that way. As evening approached, Sarah found herself thinking about the events of the past few days. She had always known that being a paramedic involved risks, but she had never imagined that one moment of decision would change her life so dramatically. Outside her window, she could see news vans in the hospital parking lot. Dr. Wells had mentioned that reporters wanted to interview her, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for that level of attention. She preferred to let her actions speak rather than her words. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Sarah's last thoughts were of young Danny Williams and how grateful she felt that he was safe. Everything else, the ceremony, the attention, the recognition, seemed secondary to that simple fact. She had saved a life, and that was all that really mattered to her. What Sarah didn't know was that while she slept, preparations were already underway for an event that would honor her courage in a way she could never have imagined. 500 Marines were preparing to show their gratitude in the most powerful way they knew how. And when Sarah discovered what they had planned, it would be a moment that would stay with her for the rest of her life. 2 weeks after waking up in the hospital, Sarah was finally cleared to go home. Her ribs had healed enough that she could move around without significant pain, and her concussion symptoms had largely subsided. Dr. Wells had insisted she take at least another month off from active paramedic duty. But Sarah was eager to get back to some sense of normalcy. The media attention had been more intense than she had anticipated. Local news stations had run the story repeatedly, and it had been picked up by national outlets. Sarah had agreed to do one interview with the local newspaper, thinking it would satisfy the public's curiosity. But instead, it seemed to generate even more interest. Mike had been keeping her updated on developments at the fire station. Apparently, they had received hundreds of letters and emails from people expressing their admiration for Sarah's actions. Many were from military families, thanking her for risking her life to save one of their own. You've become a symbol, Mike had told her during one of his visits. People see your story as proof that there are still heroes in the world. Sarah felt uncomfortable with that description. In her mind, She had simply done what any decent person would do in that situation. The idea that people saw her as some kind of symbol felt like too much pressure. Private First Class Danny Williams had recovered quickly from his injuries. His broken leg was healing well, and he had been cleared to return to light duty. He had visited Sarah several times during her recovery, and they had developed a genuine friendship. Despite their age difference, they shared a bond forged by their shared experience in that overturned truck. During one of his visits, Danny had mentioned that his unit was planning something special to thank Sarah, but he had been deliberately vague about the details. "You'll see," he had said with a mysterious smile. The whole unit wanted to do something to show their appreciation. Sarah had assumed it would be a small gathering, maybe a plaque or a certificate. She had no idea what was actually being planned. The call came on a Thursday morning in April. Colonel Harrison phoned Sarah personally to invite her to Camp Pendleton for what he described as a small ceremony to recognize her actions. He explained that it would be attended by Danny's unit and a few other Marines, and that it would be relatively informal. "We just want to say thank you properly," the colonel had said. "And I think it would mean a lot to the Marines if you could be there." Sarah agreed, though she felt nervous about the prospect of being the center of attention at a military ceremony. She had never been on a military base before, and she wasn't sure what to expect. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday. Sarah's parents drove down from Sacramento to accompany her, along with Mike and Chief Bradley, who had both been invited as well. Dr. Wells had also been included, representing the medical community that Sarah was part of. As their car approached the gates of Camp Pendleton, Sarah felt her anxiety increasing. The base was enormous, much larger than she had imagined, with rows of military buildings stretching as far as she could see. Marines in uniform were everywhere, going about their daily duties with the efficiency and purpose she had heard about but never witnessed firsthand. Colonel Harrison met them at the visitor center and personally escorted them to what he described as the ceremony location. As they drove through the base, Sarah noticed that there seemed to be more activity than usual, with Marines moving in organized groups and vehicles positioned in specific formations. "Colonel, this seems like more than a small ceremony," Sarah said, as they passed what appeared to be several hundred Marines assembled in formation. Colonel Harrison smiled but didn't answer directly. "Sometimes, things grow beyond their original scope," he said. "Word of what you did has spread throughout the base. A lot of Marines wanted to be here today." When they arrived at the ceremony site, Sarah realized that a lot of Marines was a significant understatement. The area was a large parade ground, and it was filled with Marines in dress blue uniforms standing in perfect formation. Sarah estimated there had to be at least 500 of them, all standing at attention in neat, precise rows. At the front of the formation was a small platform with a podium and several chairs. A Marine band was positioned to one side, their instruments gleaming in the morning sun. The entire scene was both impressive and intimidating. "This is incredible," Sarah's father whispered as they were escorted to their seats on the platform. "I had no idea the military did things on this scale." Colonel Harrison took the podium and began the ceremony with remarks about courage, sacrifice, and the bond between the military and the civilians they serve to protect. He spoke about how Sarah's actions represented the best of American values and the kind of heroism that inspires others to serve. Then Danny Williams was called to the podium. He looked confident and proud in his dress uniform, a striking contrast to the injured young man Sarah had first met in that overturned truck. "2 months ago, I was trapped and dying," Danny began, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground through the sound system. "I was unconscious and alone. And if it wasn't for the courage of one woman, I wouldn't be standing here today." He went on to describe the accident and rescue from his perspective, including details that Sarah had never heard before. He talked about waking up briefly during the truck's second fall and seeing Sarah positioned protectively over him, and how that image had stayed with him throughout his recovery. "Sarah Martinez didn't just save my life," Danny concluded. "She showed all of us what it means to put someone else's welfare above your own safety. She embodies the values that we as Marines strive to live by every day." When Danny finished speaking, Colonel Harrison called Sarah to the podium. As she stood and walked toward the microphone, she felt overwhelmed by the sight of 500 Marines standing in perfect formation, all watching her with expressions of respect and gratitude. "I don't really know what to say," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm honored to be here, and I'm grateful that Danny is okay. But I want everyone to know that I don't see myself as a hero. I was just trying to help someone who needed it." She paused and looked out at the sea of Marines. "What I've learned from this experience is that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid, but doing the right thing anyway. And looking at all of you, I know that you understand that better than anyone." Sarah went on to talk about her respect for the military and her gratitude for the sacrifices that service members and their families make every day. She spoke from the heart, without prepared remarks, and her sincerity was evident in every word. When she finished speaking, Colonel Harrison presented her with a special commendation from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, recognizing her courage and selfless service. The citation read in part, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in risking her own life to save the life of a United States Marine. Rita Daces." End quote. But it was what happened next that would stay with Sarah forever. Colonel Harrison nodded to the senior enlisted Marine in charge of the formation, who barked out a command that echoed across the parade ground. "Present arms." In one fluid, synchronized movement, all 500 Marines raised their hands in salute. The sight was breathtaking and deeply moving. Row after row of Marines, as far as Sarah could see, all saluting her in perfect unison. The morning sun reflected off their white gloves and the brass buttons of their uniforms, creating a scene of incredible beauty and power. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked out at the assembled Marines. She had never experienced anything like this moment of pure honor and respect. She could see that many of the Marines were emotional as well, understanding the significance of what they were doing. The salute lasted for a full minute, though it felt much longer to Sarah. During that time, she thought about the events that had led to this moment. From that foggy morning, when the truck went off the road, to this incredible display of military honor and gratitude. When the Marines finally lowered their hands and returned to attention, the parade ground was completely silent except for the sound of flags fluttering in the breeze. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. A moment that would be remembered, not just by her, but by everyone present. As the ceremony concluded and the Marines began to file off the parade ground in perfect order, many of them made a point to walk past Sarah and thank her personally. Some simply shook her hand, while others shared brief stories about their own families or their reasons for serving. One young Marine, who couldn't have been much older than Danny, stopped to speak with her. "Ma'am, my sister is a paramedic in Texas," he said. "When I heard about what you did, it made me proud to know there are people like you taking care of folks back home while we're deployed." Another Marine, a sergeant with multiple deployment ribbons on his chest, simply said, "Thank you for saving one of ours. We don't forget things like that." As Sarah and her family prepared to leave the base, Danny Williams walked with them to their car. He was still on crutches, but he was moving more easily than he had been weeks earlier. "How do you feel?" he asked Sarah as they reached the parking area. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Grateful," she said finally. "Grateful that you're okay. Grateful for the honor they showed me today. And grateful to live in a country where people like you are willing to serve." Danny nodded and extended his hand for what Sarah thought would be a handshake. Instead, he pulled her into a gentle hug. "You'll always be family to us," he said simply. "Any Marine, anywhere in the world, will know your story. And if you ever need anything, ever, you just have to ask." As they drove away from Camp Pendleton, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple decision to help someone in need. The accident that had brought her and Danny together had lasted only a few hours, but its impact would continue for the rest of their lives. The image of 500 Marines saluting her courage would stay with Sarah forever, reminding her that sometimes, the most important moments in life come when we choose to put someone else's needs above our own safety. She had saved one Marine's life, but in doing so, she had gained the respect and gratitude of an entire military community. Years later, whenever Sarah faced difficult decisions or challenging situations, she would remember that moment on the parade ground, and the lesson it taught her about the power of courage and the importance of never giving up on someone who needs help. The salute had been for her, but the inspiration it provided would benefit countless others in the years to come.